Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 227, Confession and Leniency. Chapter 227, Confession and Leniency. It was a special kind of attack, a parting gift from the Demon King. And Frieren had been the unlucky one. From the sound of it, it had been a one-time use. Otherwise, the other two would have been hit as well. But for them to have just taken the city's power, the sheer audacity of it. They were either in a dungeon now or on a wanted poster. "What's the name of the city?" she asked. "I'm sorry. I don't know." She had been unconscious, after all. "Calm down, Serie," he said, and gently patted her on the head. "There aren't that many human cities in the north, and even fewer with priests. We'll find them. I'm just worried that they might have surrendered." She knew her two students. Ella was the quiet one, but she could be reckless. The idea to take the city's power, it was probably hers. And the other, under his own, gentle tutelage, she had become a kind and good-hearted person, a person that she herself was not. And if they were to find themselves in a situation where they knew they were in the wrong, and where they did not want to harm any innocents, they would have just surrendered. That's a possibility. "It seems we'll have to go at once." "I'd like to see who dares to lay a hand on them," she said. "But first." His gaze now fell on the still unconscious girl. "We have to find a place for her. She needs to rest." She, too, looked at her. To take her with them, she would just be a burden. But to leave her here, that was not safe either. "I want to go with you," she said, her voice now a small and weak sound. She didn't want to be the reason for any delay. And she had to know if they were safe. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, and with a gentle touch, a wave of a soft and calming magic now pressed her back down. "You can barely walk. How can you go anywhere?" He saw the stubborn look in her eyes, and a small smile touched his lips. "It seems they did not save you in vain." "Very well. If you must go, she can carry you," he said, and pointed to the other. "Huh," she said, her eyes widening. "Why should I carry her? I heard that elves don't like to touch strangers." "It would be inappropriate, wouldn't it?" "I don't care about such things." Her own travels with him, she had not cared then. Of course, he was an exception. "If it's not too much trouble, Lord Rhodes," she said, her own voice a meek and submissive sound. "All right then," he said, and turned to her. "You stay and look after her. I'll be right back." "Where are you going?" "I thought we were in a hurry." "We need a ride, don't we? And I need to get some information. Or did you want to fly all the way there?" And before she could ask any more questions, he was gone, a silent and traceless departure. She looked at the spot where he had been and just pouted. Secrets again, she thought. A ride, he's just going to find a new power source. But she still found a more comfortable spot for the other girl. She looked at him, at his sudden disappearance, and a wave of a new and profound awe washed over her. Just how strong are they? She thought, and her gaze now fell upon the other, upon the beautiful elf with the long, golden hair, an elf who now radiated an aura of a cold and unapproachable power. "Lady Serie," she asked softly, is he always like that?" "Don't mind him," she said without looking up. "He's always like that. So mysterious, and always doing whatever he wants, without a care for whether or not he's making people worry." Her tone was a feigned annoyance, but her words, they held a warmth and a familiarity that the other girl could not miss. "Oh," she said, and asked no more questions. "In an interrogation room." "Name?" "Ella," she said, her own voice a tired and weary sound. She was chained to a chair, a magical ward preventing her from using her own power. "Sex?" "Female." "Can't you tell?" she said, and gave the mage before her a look. "And race?" She wanted to say something sarcastic about her long, pointed ears. But the young woman before her, she looked so nervous, so unsure of herself. "Elf." The mage quickly wrote it down, a look of a profound and abiding fear on her face. To interrogate an elf, a powerful elven mage, it was a thing no one wanted to do. The relationship between humans and elves, it was a delicate one. After the founding of the Kingdom of Ursen, there had been a brief period of a honeymoon between them. But as humanity had grown stronger, and the elves, having lost their ancestral home, had begun to decline, that relationship had grown strained. They were still one of the most powerful races in the world, and an elven mage of her caliber, she was a person of a great and terrible importance. To mishandle this, it could lead to a diplomatic incident of a disastrous proportion. The older, more experienced mages had all known this, and so the task had been pushed onto her, the rookie. In another interrogation room. The atmosphere here was a little less grim. She was not in chains, and there were only a few guards outside the door. And across from her sat a middle-aged man in the fine clothes of a nobleman, the Duke of this city himself. "Miss Flam, is it?" His voice was a calm and level sound, but with an undercurrent of an undeniable authority. "I am surprised. With your human identity, and your great magical talent, why would you, along with that elf, do such a reckless thing?" End of chapter. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter. Chapter 228, Chapter 228, Your Teacher is Serie. Chapter 228, Your Teacher is Serie. Flam was treated a little better. Though her own magic was also restricted, she was not in chains. There was even a glass of water on the table before her. "My Lord Duke, we did not mean to damage the city's barrier." She began, and told him everything, from the beginning. Just for that, the Duke of Hohenheim said, a look of a pure and simple disbelief on his face. "Why did you not just ask for help?" "We did," she said, her own voice now a little lower. "But they told us that they could do nothing. But to do all this, for a single elf." He did not understand. To cause such a commotion, and to drag an elf into it, it was all giving him a headache. "We had no choice," she said, a look of a pure and simple guilt on her face. "We had to take the risk. We had to send her to the only one who could save her." "The only one," he said, his own ears now pricked. "And who is that? And what makes you so sure that they can?" She hesitated. To tell him the names of her teachers, it could be a way out. But it could also cause more trouble than it was worth. But the look on his face, and the thought of her senior, who was now a prisoner, she made her choice. "Our teacher," she said softly. "Ella and I, we are of the same school." "Oh," he said, his own interest now piqued. "To be able to train a powerful mage such as yourself, and an elf as well, your teacher must be no ordinary person. What is his name?" He began to run through a list of all the famous mages he knew. But he could not think of a single one who took apprentices from different races. She took a deep breath. She wanted to say his name, but she knew it was a name that carried too much weight, a name that would bring a new and different kind of trouble. And so, she gave him the other. Serie. Serie. The Duke, who had been so calm and so composed just a moment before, now shot to his feet, a look of a pure and utter disbelief, and even a hint of a new and terrible fear, on his face. "Did you say, the elven saint, Lady Serie? The one who stood with the legendary godslayer, Lord Rhodes?" He had every right to be shocked. Her name, it was a living myth, a legend, a name that was revered by all the great mages of the land, a name that represented the very pinnacle of a magical power, a deep and ancient wisdom. Her apprentice. The very thought of it was a terrifying thing. "Yes," she said with a nod. He slowly sank back into his chair, his own heart now a pounding drum. It took him a long moment to process what he had just heard. He stared at her, trying to find a lie in her eyes, but he could only see a calm and honest gaze. "Proof," he said, his own voice now a little shaky. "What proof do you have? To use the name of such a revered figure, it is a crime that will only add to your own sentence." She was silent. She had no proof. Her teacher, she had never given her any token of her apprenticeship. Her own knowledge, her own understanding of magic, that was her proof. But how could she show that to a stranger? A few light arrows. Every mage in the land could do that now, thanks to him. "I have no token," she said with a shake of her head. "My teacher never gave me one." He frowned. No proof? Then how was he to know if she was telling the truth? But, he had never heard of her giving her apprentices any kind of an official mark. And the girl, she was a powerful mage, no doubt about that. To have been trained by a legend, it was a plausible story. He was torn. Just then, the door opened, and the bishop, Cassarius, walked in. "You've come," the Duke said with a nod. The bishop gave a slight bow and looked from the girl to the Duke. "What is the situation?" He told him everything, and at the mention of the name, his own face was a mask of a pure and utter shock. "No wonder," he murmured to himself, and then he looked at the girl. "You used a teleportation spell. You sent the elven girl away." "Yes," she said. She had a good feeling about him, the one who had been willing to help. "The residual spatial fluctuation, it is very complex. It is a modified version of the common spell, and a very impressive one," he said, and then turned to the Duke. "My Lord Duke, the barrier is stable, though it has been severely depleted. It will take about a month for it to fully recharge." "A month, that is just in time for the monster tide," he said with a sigh of relief. The barrier was the very foundation of their city. But to have been depleted to such a degree, the loss. "My Lord Duke," he interrupted, and a new and strange look came over his face. Such a loss, in exchange for the favor of 2 of her apprentices, one of whom is an elf, it is a small price to pay. You mean? She is not lying. At least, I do not believe she is, he said, his own voice a calm and level sound. A teleportation spell of that magnitude, it is, in itself, a powerful proof. And their purpose, it was to save a life, not to destroy. They have caused no great harm. He was telling him to let it go. To punish them, it would be to risk her wrath. But the elven girl they sent, the dark corruption within her, it was a thing that even I could not heal. And they sent her to Lady Serie. Does she have some special way to deal with it? He was, of course, curious. What kind of a holy magic could she possibly possess? The Duke's head was now a throbbing mass of a pure and unadulterated pain. The other girl, he did not care about her. But these 2, if they really were her apprentices, their own status was a very delicate and a very dangerous thing. To imprison them, to judge them, to incur the wrath of a living legend, a chill ran down his spine. Then what do you propose we do, he asked, and pushed the problem onto the other men. To release them, it would be a breach of a protocol, he said after a moment of a deep and thoughtful consideration. But to punish them severely, it is a great risk, and they did have a good reason for their actions. Perhaps we can just keep them here, in a comfortable and well-appointed prison, and in the meantime, we can send a messenger to the Elven Kingdom, to verify their identities. It was a compromise, a way to save face. I agree, she said. But please, be quick. We are very worried about the elven girl's safety. We will do our best, he said with a nod. And I hope that she will be saved. And with that, the tension in the room was finally broken. She was taken to a quiet and comfortable prison cell. And Ella, not long after, was brought to the one next to her. End of chapter. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter. Chapter 229, Chapter 229, a 40-year reunion, and a Frieren falls from the sky. Chapter 229, a 40-year reunion, and a Frieren falls from the sky. New Moon City, the most powerful of all the human cities in the far north. For years, it had been protected by its great barrier, a barrier that had withstood countless monster tides. But now, it was on the verge of collapse. The magical alarm, the highest level of a disaster warning, was blaring, a piercing and deafening sound that echoed through the city. Outside the walls, a black tide of monstrous and terrible creatures was battering against the barrier, their numbers so great that they had blotted out the very sun. Quickly! All mages, to the core nodes. Pour in all of your mana. Now. The commander's roar was a desperate and futile thing, lost in the din of the battle. Before, they would have opened a small gap in the barrier, lured them in, and then unleashed a torrent of a fire and a death upon them. But now, the barrier's own power was too low, to open it and then close it would just drain the last of its reserves. They had no choice but to hunker down and hope that it would hold. In the temple, all the mages of the city, both high and low, were gathered, pouring their own power into the great and hungry machine. But it was a futile gesture, a single drop of a water in a vast and thirsty desert. The amount of mana that the 2 girls had drawn, it had been too great, a hole that they could not possibly fill. And the cracks were now beginning to appear, a spiderweb of a despair that was spreading across the sky. In the dungeons, they both felt it, the trembling of the earth, the roar of the monsters, the dying scream of the great barrier. What's happening, she said, her own voice a new and terrible sound. The monster tide, it's come early, a young guard said, his own face a pale and ashen thing. And it's bigger than ever before. The barrier, it won't hold. It was us. The thought was a sharp and piercing pain, a dagger in their hearts. To save one life, they had doomed a whole city. Let us out, the girl said, her own voice now a desperate and pleading sound. We are mages. We can help. Go and tell the Duke, and the Bishop, the other said, and her own voice, it was a command. We must atone for what we have done. It's madness. What can they do, the Duke had said. But the Bishop, he had seen it, in the spell they had cast, a power that was not of this age. And so he had agreed. Let them out. And now, they were in the heart of the great and terrible machine, a place where a score of mages were all desperately trying to hold back the inevitable. It's no use, one of them cried, a note of a pure and utter despair in his own voice. The rate of a consumption, we cannot keep up. Then what are we to do, the Duke asked. We have to go outside, the girl said. We have to fight them. No, he had cried. To open a hole now, and to send them out, into that black and terrible sea, it was a suicide. It is the only way, she had said, and in her own eyes, a new and terrible resolve. Open it, the Bishop had said. Let them go. And a small hole had appeared in the great and terrible wall, a hole just big enough for 2, and they had shot through it like a streak of a light. And now, they were in the midst of it, a small and fragile thing, in a vast and terrible sea. I will take the ones on the ground, the girl said. And I, the ones in the sky. And with a wave of her hand, 1,000 golden arrows now rained down from the heavens, and the beasts below were consumed in a storm of a holy fire. And she, the elf, with a single, elegant gesture, 1,000 green vines now shot up from the earth and, like a series of a great and terrible snakes, they crushed the flying creatures in their grasp, and a rain of a blood and a gore now fell upon the ground. And the guards, on the walls, they saw it, and a new and terrible hope, a hope they had not dared to feel, now bloomed in their hearts. And the duke, and the bishop, they, too, saw it, and were stunned. The power of these two, it was beyond anything they had ever seen. She really is her apprentice, the duke had murmured. But there were too many of them. They were an endless, teeming tide of a pure and unadulterated evil. And her own mana was now a fading and a flickering thing. And the great barrier, the last and final hope of the city, was now a pale and a translucent thing. And with a final, terrible scream of a dying magic, it shattered. The barrier is broken. And the black and terrible tide, it now rushed forward, a wave of a pure and unadulterated death. Prepare for a close-quarters battle, the duke said, his own sword now in his hand. And the girl, in the sky above, she saw it, and a new and terrible despair now washed over her. It was us, she thought, and a tear, a single, solitary tear, now rolled down her cheek. And just then, the very air in the center of the battlefield began to twist and to warp. And a magic circle, a circle of a power so great, so vast, so beyond anything she had ever seen, now appeared in the sky. And 3 figures, in a brilliant and a dazzling light, now emerged. A blonde-haired elven woman, a cold and a terrible rage in her eyes. And beside her, a young, black-haired man. And on his back, a young, white-haired elven girl, her own arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Oh! Quite a party, he said, and looked down at the black and teeming tide below. Teacher Rhodes. Teacher Serie, the two cried out, their own voices a mixture of a pure and utter relief, and a deep and abiding shame. Teacher. Frieren. The little one is fine. Just a little afraid of heights, he said, and gave her a little bounce, and a small, startled cry now came from the girl on his back. Don't move, she whispered. And I'm not a child. I'm almost 100 years old. Then you are a child, he said, and then, he tried to dislodge her from his back, but her own grip was a surprisingly strong one. All right, that's enough now. He finally managed to get her off, and handed her to her new master. And now, to deal with this mess, he said. It seems we've arrived just in time. I'm sorry, she said, her own voice now a low and quiet sound, a sound of a deep and abiding shame. It's all our fault. All right, he said, and ruffled her hair. No need to look so sad. Since my own, dear apprentice has asked for my help, how could I refuse? He looked at her, at the other, and with a smile, he raised his own hand, a gesture of a pure and simple power. And in the empty air, a portal opened, a portal of a shimmering and a swirling light. And from it, 2 swords emerged. The divine right sword, Org, and the holy right sword, Athos. He handed one to her. Put up a barrier. Keep them from getting into the city. She took it and, with a new and terrible power now at her own command, a massive, green barrier, a barrier of a pure and unadulterated life, now surrounded the entire city. And a few of the beasts, the ones that had been too close, were now a cloud of a fine and a holy dust. And he now held Org. And with a casual and an almost indifferent gesture, he pointed it at the black and teeming tide below. It's been a while, he murmured. Full release. And a pillar of a white and a holy light, a pillar of a power so great, so vast, so beyond all comprehension, now shot from its tip, a beam of a pure and unadulterated destruction that was now a silent and a terrible thing, a thing that was now consuming all that it touched. And the black and teeming tide, the endless and despairing horde of a pure and unadulterated evil, it was now gone. A deep and a terrible chasm was now where it had once been, and a dead and a terrible silence now fell upon the battlefield. And the demons, the few that had remained on the periphery, they were now a fleeing and a terrified mob. The girl, and her senior, they were now in a state of a pure and utter shock, their own minds now a blank and a terrible void. Job done, he said, and sheathed his sword, and yawned. Good control. I didn't even pierce the ley line. Show off, she said, and her own barrier now faded away. She looked at her 2 stunned and speechless apprentices. What are you 2 just standing there for? You've caused all this trouble, and we have to clean it up. We'll have a talk about this later, she said, her own voice a cold and a level sound, but with no real anger in it. All right, he said. I'm a little hungry. Let's eat first. We can talk about their punishment later. The Duke and the Bishop, they, too, were now a picture of a pure and utter shock, and a new and terrible gratitude. So they really are her apprentices, and that other one, who is he? And with a new and terrible reverence, they now hurried to greet the beings who had just saved their city, beings whose power was beyond all mortal comprehension. At the very least, their city was safe. End of chapter. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter. Chapter 230, Chapter 230, Flam gains an apprentice. Chapter 230, Flam gains an apprentice. A little hungry, had been met with a stunned silence. Even the Duke and the Bishop were at a loss for words. A soldier, his own hands now white-knuckled with a new and different kind of a fear, swallowed hard. Food. He thought, his own mind still reeling from the sudden and unexpected shift from a certain and terrible death to a dinner party. It was an surreal feeling. One moment, they had been on the verge of a desperate and a bloody last stand. The next, a savior had descended from the heavens and had, with a single, effortless blow, wiped out the entire demon army. And the first words from his mouth had been about food. The contrast, it was too great. In the end, it was the bishop who was the first to recover. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, a new and a profound reverence in his own eyes. "I am Cassarius, the bishop of New Moon City," he said with a deep bow. "And I thank you for saving us." "And I, Lord Hodder, the Duke of New Moon City," the other said, and also bowed. "We are eternally in your debt." His own back was now slick with a cold sweat. He was so glad that he had listened to the bishop's advice, that he had not mistreated the two girls. "There is no need for such formalities," he said with a wave of his hand. "My own apprentices caused this mess, after all. It is only right that I clean it up." He said it so casually, as if it had been nothing at all. His words made the girl's own face burn with a new and a different kind of a shame, and she buried her face in her hands. And even the other, the elf, a blush was now creeping up her own neck. The words he had used. They were a little crude. "What a strange analogy," she said. "Could you not have chosen a more elegant one? It's a crude but an apt one, isn't it?" She just glared at him, but did not say another word. She turned her gaze to the two girls, and for a moment, a flicker of a genuine and a sincere concern was in her own eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was as cold and as sharp as ever. "To be unable to handle such a small matter, you have brought shame upon me. But at least you are not dead. Teacher Serie, we..." They both began, a torrent of explanations now on their lips. Later, she cut him off. He was hungry, and that was the only thing that mattered now. "I am Serie," she said to the Duke and the Bishop. "And he," she said, and turned to him, the choice of his own introduction now in his own hands. "I am Rhodes." ? She looked at him, a new and a different kind of a surprise on her own face. He had always been so secretive. Why was he revealing his own name now? "Rhodes," the Duke said, a look of a pure and an utter confusion on his own face. "The same as the Godslayer? What a fateful coincidence." Even now, even after all he had seen, he had not made the connection. And she, in the corner, with her own, now open and knowing eyes, a small and a strange smile was now on her own face. The two, they were the same. Of course. The power, the coincidence, it was too great. But she would keep her own suspicion to herself for now. "Lady Serie, and Lord Rhodes," the two said, their own voices now filled with a new and a terrible reverence. "All right, that's enough," he said with a stretch and a yawn. "Can you find us a place to rest? And perhaps, something to eat? I think this little one is hungry as well," he said, and pointed to the other girl, who was now hiding behind the other two. At the mention of her own name, she flinched, and a new and a different kind of a panic was now in her own eyes. I am not." "Of course," the Duke said with a hasty bow. "I will make the arrangements at once." The Duke and the Bishop, their own faces now a picture of a pure and a reverent awe, led them into the city. In the grand banquet hall of the Duke's own palace, a feast had been laid out. This is not a matter that should be taken lightly, the Bishop had said at their earlier meeting, when they had told him the full story. And the Duke had agreed. The matter of the two girls' own transgression was now a thing of the past. To have been a guest to such a power, it was an honor, and a terrifying one. "Lady Serie, Lord Rhodes," the Bishop now said, his own voice a new and a different sound, a sound of a pure and a sincere reverence. "We are in your debt." "There is no need for such words," he said. "The tide of monsters, its early and its powerful arrival, it was not just a coincidence. I could feel it, a dark and a guiding presence, a thing that was not of a normal monster. It was the work of a demon." At his own words, the Bishop's own face was now a mask of a pure and a terrible concern. "The demons, they knew your own barrier was weak, and they took the opportunity to strike," he continued. "Even without my apprentice's own transgression, you would have been in a great and a terrible danger." The Duke and the Bishop exchanged a look, a new and a terrible fear in their own eyes. And the two girls, a new and a different kind of a relief was now in their own hearts. It had not been entirely their fault. As a gesture of our own compensation, and as a token of our own gratitude, for your own hospitality, he said, and a new and a terrible power now emanated from him. Let me refill your own barrier. A wave of a pure and a holy light, a torrent of a raw and an untamed magical power, now flowed from him and, in a single and an effortless gesture, the great and a terrible barrier of the city, which had been a flickering and a dying thing, was now a new and a brilliant thing, a thing that was even stronger than before. And then, he took a sip of his own wine and said, "There. All done. Now, I am a little hungry." Later, in the guest chambers. "Teacher. I am so sorry," the two said once more. "We will discuss your punishment later," she said, her own voice a cold and a level sound. "And next time, be more careful," he said with a wave of his hand. "By the way, I forgot to ask. How are you feeling?" he said to the other girl, to Frieren. I am fine. But my village. A third of your own people survived," the other girl said, her own voice a soft and a sad sound. "And we helped them to rebuild." "And what will you do now?" he asked. I want to go back. And then, I want to go with you." He and she exchanged a look. "Your own magical talent, it is good," she said. "But you are a little clumsy." The other girl's own eyes lit up. Was he going to take her as his own apprentice? "In that case," he said, and his own gaze now fell on the other, "from now on, you will learn from her. Question mark. She will be your own apprentice now." But Teacher Rhodes. I have never been a teacher before," she said, a new and a different kind of a panic in her own voice. "And to teach another, an elf, a mage who was already a powerful in her own right. What are you afraid of?" she said, her own voice now a sharp and a cold sound. "Just try. And if she is too stupid, just throw her away." "I will do my best," the other said with a serious nod. And so, with her own two teachers' own, and rather, strange, blessing, she had, in a single and an unexpected moment, gained an apprentice of her own. End of chapter. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter. Chapter 231, Chapter 231, Drunkenness and a Sudden Kiss. Chapter 231, Drunkenness and a Sudden Kiss. Outside the walls of the holy city. The deafening roar of the battlefield had faded, and in a hidden cave, a pair of eyes, which were themselves now hidden under the shadow of a hood, narrowed. Finn, one of the 7 sages of destruction. He had, with great effort and a great deal of his master's own power, brought forth this wave of a pure and unadulterated destruction. And he had been on the verge of victory. But all of his plans, all of his ambitions, they had all been reduced to dust by a single, terrifyingly powerful, and completely unexpected, beam of light. And he, himself, he could feel the last of the psychic energy he had poured into the monster tide, it had been instantly vaporized, with not even a single, fleeting pang of a feedback pain. That power, it was beyond his comprehension. The Godslayer. Rhodes. The name was a bitter taste in his mouth. To be so utterly, and so completely, defeated, a wave of a pure and unadulterated rage washed over him. The man, he had not only destroyed their plans for a global domination 1,000 years ago, but he had, by some unknown means, lived for 1,000 years, and was now, once again, standing in their way. Even their new king was wary of him. And he had thought, with his master's own blessing, but no. Before him, he was a mere clown on a stage, a puppet in a play of his own, deluded, making. And to stay here, it would be to just become another speck of dust in the light of his own terrible power. With a final, frustrated growl, he turned and left. He had to report this to his king. And the next move, it would be his to make. In the deep of a night in the holy city. A cool breeze was blowing, and the streets were now empty. Rhodes quietly opened his eyes. He had not been asleep, just in a state of a light rest. And the aura of the one in the next room, it had changed. She was gone. He got up and, following the faint and familiar magical fluctuation, he came to a wide, open terrace at the back of the ducal palace. And there she was, sitting on the railing, her golden hair now undone, a cascade of a liquid moonlight that flowed down her back. A few empty wine bottles were at her feet. The air was thick with the scent of a rich, full-bodied wine, and the sharp, spicy aroma of a dwarven spirit. She's been drinking, he thought, and frowned. The strong stuff. He walked over to her. She did not turn, and he did not know if she had not heard him, or if the sound of his footsteps, a sound that had been a constant and a comforting presence in her long, long life, had just not registered as a threat. She just looked up at the moon, and her eyes, her usually sharp and clear eyes, were now a little hazy. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his own voice a soft and a quiet sound. She slowly turned, and her eyes, they struggled to focus on him. She did not answer him right away, but just held up her own cup to the moon, her movements now a little slow, a little soft. "The moon," she murmured, and her own voice, it was a soft and a breathy sound, a sound that was a world away from her usual cool and detached one. It seems to be wobbling. He couldn't help but laugh. She was drunk. He reached for her cup. All right, that's enough. Give it to me. You'll regret it in the morning. But she just pulled away, like a child who was afraid of having her candy taken away. No. I'm fine, she pouted, and to prove it, she tried to stand up straight, but just ended up wobbling even more, and almost fell. He just sighed and let her be, and leaned against the cold stone railing beside her. Rhodes, she said after a moment, and her own voice was now a low and a quiet sound, a sound that was filled with a deep and a heavy weariness, and a new and an unfamiliar confusion. Don't you think this is all a little boring? Boring. There's still a demon king out there. But you're here, she said, her own voice a simple and an unshakable statement of a faith that was almost a blind and a childlike one. You'll deal with him. I won't even have a chance to do anything. And what if I can't, he said, and gave her a small flick on the forehead, a gesture that did not seem to have any effect. Then that's that. She looked down at her cup. I've been in the forest for so long, she said. All those spells. I can cast them with my eyes closed. All those books. I've read them all, 100 times over. And any new research, it's all so slow. He understood. An eternal life, a power that was at its absolute peak, and a lack of a new and an interesting stimulation. She was bored. Even with the threat still on the horizon, in the depths of her heart, she was so sure that he would deal with it, that she had nothing to do. So you don't want to go back to the forest, he asked. No, she said with a firm shake of her head. It's no fun. I want to do something different. To see her like this, without her usual armor, her usual mask, to see her so lost, a new and an old idea, an idea he had been nurturing for a long, long time, now came to the forefront of his mind. If you're bored, he said with a smile, and you want to do something interesting. I have an idea. Do you want to hear it? What is it? She asked, her own eyes now a little more focused, a little more curious. Let's create an organization, he said, and his own gaze now turned to the starry sky, an organization that is beyond the boundaries of a nation or a race. A magic association for all the mages of the continent. A magic association, she repeated, and a new and an interested light now shone in her own eyes. Yes. Right now, the ranking of mages, it's a mess. The court certifications of the humans, the levels of the different academies, the ancient traditions of the elves, there's no unified system. We can create one. And why would anyone join? She asked. Simple. For any mage who passes our final test, we will grant them any one spell they desire. And the highest rank, the very pinnacle of a magical achievement, we'll call it a first-rank mage. And the sole and final judge of that rank. He paused. Her own eyes were now wide, and the last of her own drunken stupor was now gone, replaced by a new and an all-consuming excitement. Me, she said, her own voice a breathless whisper. Yes, he smiled. Who else? The strongest mage on the continent, the sheer force of your own magical power, it would be enough to make any applicant tremble in their boots. And you would get to meet them, the mages of the continent, with all their strange and wonderful talents. You could take on any of them as an apprentice, and you could study all the new and the interesting fields of a magic that you have never even heard of. She was now completely sold. All of her own boredom and her own confusion, it was all gone, replaced by a new and a vibrant excitement. The only examiner of the first-rank mages, it had a nice ring to it. It sounds interesting, she said with a happy and a slightly drunken giggle. She stood, to express her own full and an enthusiastic agreement, but she had overestimated her own, now slightly impaired, motor skills, and she stumbled, and she fell. He, of course, was there to catch her. And he was fast. But perhaps, the moonlight was too beautiful, and his own movements, they were just a fraction of a second too slow. And they fell together, in a heap, on the cold stone floor, he on the bottom, and she on top. And the first thing she felt, it was not the hard and a cold stone, but the soft and a warm feel of his lips on hers. They both froze. Her golden hair fell around them, a curtain of a shimmering gold, and in their own, small and a private world, the only sounds were their own, now ragged, breath, and the frantic pounding of their own hearts. A single, fleeting thought now went through his own mind, was that an accident? Her own mind, it was a blank, a void, a place where all of her own, carefully constructed, composure had now completely shattered. The feel of his chest, the warmth of it, and the feel of his lips on hers, a feeling that was now a searing brand on her own memory, a new and a complex and a confusing emotion was now flooding her very being, and she was so stiff, she had even forgotten to breathe. A second, 2 seconds, an eternity. And then, she was scrambling away from him, her own face a new and a brilliant shade of a red. You, she said, her own voice now a squeak, her own mind a jumble of a confused and a contradictory thoughts. He, for his part, just sat there and touched his own lips, a faint taste of a wine still on them. He saw her own, now flustered and a furious expression, and a new and a different kind of a grin now spread across his own face. The first kiss of him and her, and it had been an accident. But to see her like this, it was a new and a wonderful thing. He wanted to see it again. It was an accident, he said, and the grin on his face now widened. You were the one who fell. I was just trying to catch you. And you just happened to catch me like that. Do you think I'm a fool, she said, but her own voice was now a little weak. She could still feel it, the racing of her own heart. All right, all right. My fault, he said with a smile. That magic association you were talking about. She said, her own back now turned to him, her own voice a little too loud, a little too forced. How would we even start? And in the place where he could not see her, she was now gently touching her own lips, as if to savor the lingering taste of a wine and a surprise. First, we'll need a rigorous system of an examination, a hierarchy of 3 ranks. And the final test, in the kingdom of Ursen. The history of that place, it has a certain weight, don't you think? It does, she said, her own voice now a little more composed. But the standard must be a high one. Not just any rabble can become a mage. Of course, he said with a smile. And all the mages of the continent will come, to be judged, to be tested, to strive for the highest rank. Just think of all the new and the interesting people we'll meet, the new and the interesting ideas we'll encounter. Her own eyes were now shining with a new and a different light. Yes, this was much more interesting than just sitting in a forest. And she was already thinking of all the new and rigorous tests she could devise. The awkwardness of the moment had now been washed away by a new and an exciting future. But the seed of a new and a different feeling had been planted. And in a corner of the terrace, in the shadows, another figure had seen it all. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter. Chapter 232, Flam's aching chest. Chapter 232, Flam's aching chest. In her room in the Duke's palace, Flam awoke from a nightmare. It was a vision of the battle, but this time, he had not been there to save them. The barrier had shattered, and the monsters had poured in. Her throat was dry. She quietly got up and, seeing Frieren still sound asleep in the other bed, she crept out of the room to get a drink of water. The hallway was dark, but the moonlight streamed in through the windows. She rubbed her throbbing head and was about to go downstairs when she heard voices from the terrace. One was a cool and distant sound, but with a new and unfamiliar softness to it. It had to be Serie. And the other was him. What are they doing out there so late? A strange and irresistible curiosity took hold of her, and she crept down the hallway, her own footsteps a silent and ghostly thing, and she hid in the shadows of a pillar and looked. Serie was in a simple white robe, her usual perfect posture now a little slouched, a look of a lazy and a languid contentment on her face. And at her feet, a collection of empty wine bottles. He was standing close to her, so close, and he was saying something, his own voice a low and a gentle sound. The air between them was the same as it had been in their own secluded hut, an easy and a familiar intimacy, a thing she had seen 1,000 times before. But tonight, something was different. A strange and an unsettling premonition, a feeling of a profound and an impending loss, now washed over her. And then she saw it. Serie, she had stood, and she had stumbled, and he had reached out to catch her. He'll catch her, she thought. With his own power, it would be an easy thing. But his movements, they were just a fraction of a second too slow. And it was in that single, fleeting moment that her own, small, and a fragile world was shattered. They fell together, and their lips met. And the moonlight, it was a cruel and a terrible thing, a thing that illuminated every last, agonizing detail. Her own mind was now a blank and a terrible void, and a new and a terrible cold, a cold that was a far and a more terrible thing than the demon's own, now washed over her. She clamped a hand over her own mouth to stifle the scream that was now rising in her throat, and she stumbled back, her own back hitting the cold stone wall, and she slid to the floor, and she hid in the shadows. Why does my chest hurt so much? It was a pain so great, so terrible, that she could barely breathe. She gasped, a fish out of a water, but the air, it would not come. She had thought she had had a chance. Yes. She had finally admitted it to herself. She loved him. His wisdom, his strength, his playful and a teasing smile, and his gentleness, it had all been a sweet and a terrible poison, a poison that she had willingly drunk, and she was now hopelessly and completely in its thrall. And all her own efforts to be stronger, it was not just to meet their own expectations. It was a deeper thing, a desire to be by his side, to be a part of his own, long and a lonely life. And she had even thought, with the elf's own, long and an emotionally detached life, that she, with her own, human, feelings, that she might have had a chance. But the scene before her, it had shattered her own, foolish, hopes. 1,000 years, they had 1,000 years between them. A span of a time so vast, so great, that she could not even comprehend it. Her own few years with him, they were a mere speck of a dust in the face of it all, a ridiculous and a self-important dream. From the very beginning, her own place in his life, it had been a fixed and an unchangeable thing. Just a student. And nothing more. A wave of a hot and a bitter tears now streamed down her face, and the world was now a blur. After a long, long time, she stood and, like a ghost, she returned to her room. The other girl, she was awake. Flam, she said, her own voice a small and a quiet sound, a sound of a pure and an unadulterated concern. Did you have a nightmare? You look broken. She could not find a better word for it. It's nothing, she said, and shook her head. I think I have fallen in love with someone I should not have. And now I have to face an opponent I cannot possibly win against. The odds, they are insurmountable. Love? An opponent? A battle, she asked, her own voice a pure and an unadulterated confusion. In her own, simple world, if you liked someone, you went to them. If you did not, you stayed away. And to not be able to win a battle, then you should just retreat. She could not understand the complexities of a human's heart. But she could feel it, the deep and a profound sadness that now emanated from her. Is your opponent very strong? She asked, in her own, clumsy way. Like Lord Rhodes and Lady Serie. She paused. But even they have things they cannot do. Even the strongest have their own weaknesses. Frieren, you do not understand. This is a human emotion. No, I do not, she said, her own voice now a flat and irrational sound. For an elf, these human emotions, they are difficult to comprehend. To hint, to suggest, and even to speak of it plainly, if the emotion itself is not understood, it will only ever be met with a refusal, will it not? Her words, they were just a simple statement of a fact. But to her, in her own, now shattered, heart, they were a new and a terrible revelation. Every 150 power stones equals one extra chapter. Chapter 233, Chapter 233, The Misguided Resolve. Chapter 233, The Misguided Resolve. Yes. An elf. Frieren was an elf. And Teacher Serie was an elf. Her head snapped up, and the light in her eyes was now rekindled. It was just as she had thought. Elves were emotionally distant creatures. Their long lives had made them obtuse when it came to the fleeting and complex emotions of a human. 1,000 years. So what? 1,000 years of a companionship, was there really any love in it? Probably not. And even if there was, Serie would have surely not noticed it. But she was different. She was human, just like him. She was the only one who could truly understand the human side of him. Serie may be powerful, and she may have been with him for 1,000 years. But did she truly understand what it was to love? Like Frieren, she could not even comprehend her own feelings, and could only offer such meaningless and wrong words of a comfort. And in that instant, all of her sadness was gone, replaced by a new and a terrible resolve, a resolve that had been born of a profound misunderstanding. She could not compete with her teacher in terms of a power or of a time. But she could open a new front. A front that only she, Flam, could enter. Frieren, thank you. She grabbed the other girl's hand. Her words had been no comfort, but her own lack of an emotional understanding, it had given her a new and a terrible purpose. Her eyes were now burning with a new and a fanatical determination. The tears were still on her cheeks, but they were now overshadowed by a new and a desperate courage. I think I understand now, she said, her voice a low and an intense sound. I understand what my own advantage is. And I understand how I must fight. Understand what? She asked, a look of a pure and an unadulterated confusion on her own face. She had no idea what she had said that had triggered such a dramatic transformation. I understand where my own strength lies. And how I must now fight for what I want, she said, and then, she let go of her hand and stood. Good night, Frieren. And thank you again. And with that, she lay down in her own bed and closed her own eyes, but the rapid rise and fall of her own chest was a clear sign that her own mind was far from at peace. Frieren looked at her own now feverish and an almost manic state, and her own small and a simple mind was filled with a new and a different kind of a question. Human emotions, they were 1,000,000 times more complex than the most intricate of a magical spells. In the end, she gave up. The dawn came, and the long and a terrible night was over. But for Flam, the night had been a restless one. She had not slept at all, and the scene on the terrace had played over and over in her own mind. And her new resolve, her new fighting spirit, born of her own, now hopelessly misguided, conversation with the other girl, had now taken a firm and an unshakable hold of her own heart. She got up, as quietly as she could, so as not to disturb the other. But the other girl, she was also awake. She went to the mirror and, with a new and a deliberate care, she began to arrange her own fiery red hair, and tried to tame the few, stubborn, stray strands that were sticking up. In the mirror, the girl's own face was a pale and a weary thing, with a dark and a faint shadow under her own eyes, but her own, green and vibrant, eyes were now shining with a new and a terrible light. She had never been one to care about her own appearance. But when a girl, it could only mean one thing. "Are you awake?" she asked with a new and a different kind of a gentleness. She had not meant to wake her. "Yes. Or rather, I haven't really slept," the other said with a yawn. The other girl's own tossing and a turning had kept her up all night. And she was now so tired. She did not understand what she was doing. To get up so early, and to be so preened. Was she going into a battle? Then go back to sleep. And don't go out. I'll have someone bring you breakfast later. Okay. She went back to her own bed and, with a final look at her own reflection, the girl, with the air of a warrior who was about to go into a battle, pushed open the door and left. The hallway was a quiet and a silent thing. She crept to Serie's own door, like a thief in the night, and she pressed her own ear to it, and she listened. There was no sound. Good. She had drunk so much last night. Even with her own, elven, constitution, she would surely be in a need of a long and a restful sleep. A small and a wicked smile touched her own lips. Lady Serie and Lord Rhodes were in a very late meeting last night, she told the handmaiden, her own voice now a firm and a serious sound. She is not to be disturbed, under any circumstances. The handmaiden gave a respectful bow and said nothing. As for Sister Ella, she was a lazy one. And the other girl, she was now a prisoner in her own room. The plan was a flawless one. And now, it was a time for just the two of them. She went to his own door, her own heart now a pounding drum in her own chest. She was about to just push it open, but at the last minute, she held back, and her own hand, it was now a soft and a tentative thing as it knocked. A few moments later, the door opened. He was still in his own, comfortable and a flowing, robes, his own hair a little disheveled, and his own, now clean and a refreshed, self now stood before her. Flam. So early, his own voice was a little hoarse, but to her own ears, it was a perfect and a beautiful sound. "Good morning, teacher," she said, and her own voice, it was a little shaky. "I was just wondering if you would like to have breakfast with me." He saw the nervousness in her own eyes, but he did not think much of it. And the others? Oh, they. Her own heart skipped a beat, but her own voice, it was now a calm and a level sound. "They are still sleeping. I will have someone bring them their own food later." "And Serie," he said, and was about to go to her own room. "I will go and wake her." And the smile on her own face, it now froze, and her own, carefully constructed, composure now began to crumble. End of chapter. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter. Chapter 234, Chapter 234, Serie is asleep. Chapter 234, Serie is asleep. She quickly stepped to the side, subtly blocking his path. "Teacher Rhodes, a handmaiden can bring her something later." "There's no need to wake her," she said, her own voice a little too fast, a little too eager. He paused and thought for a moment. She was right. He knew Serie's temper. To be woken up before she was ready, it would not be pleasant. "You're right," he said. "Let her sleep." A wave of a pure and unadulterated joy washed over her. The first step is complete. She followed him to the dining hall, her own steps now a little lighter, a little more bouncy. The hall was quiet, and a lavish breakfast was already being served. Her own eyes were now fixed on the long table. Serie always sat on his left. And now, with a new and a terrible resolve, she took her place. This was a great victory. "Teacher," she said with a bright and a sunny smile, and patted the seat beside her. He just raised an eyebrow and, without a second thought, sat down. The handmaiden served them, but she had no appetite. She just nibbled at her food and watched him, her own heart now a pounding drum. An opportunity. There was a little bit of jam at the corner of his mouth. She took out her handkerchief and, with a casual and a seemingly unpremeditated motion, she leaned in and gently wiped it away. "Teacher, you have a little something here," she said. He froze. The warmth of her fingers, through the thin fabric of the handkerchief, was a searing brand on his skin. She was so close now that he could smell her own, unique scent, a scent that was a world away from Serie's own, cool and a distant fragrance, a scent of a sunshine and a wildflowers. And her own breath, a warm and a gentle thing, was a ticklish sensation on his cheek. Something was not right. He did not know what it was, but it was strange. To have spent so long with the cool and the distant Serie, he was not used to this kind of a warmth. Or perhaps, he was just misinterpreting her own, simple act of a kindness. An innocent and a childlike gesture, nothing more. But she had not pulled away. She was still close to him, her own eyes now a wide and an innocent-looking thing. Teacher, what are your own plans now? She asked, her own voice a soft and a quiet sound. About the Demon King. The subtle and an almost imperceptible feeling of a wrongness was now gone. He is a great and a terrible problem, he said, and his own voice was now a serious and a grave one. We must deal with him soon. And then he told her everything, the whole and a terrible story of the Demon King's own, twisted and a tragic origin. And as he spoke, she just listened, her own gaze a fixed and an unwavering thing, and her own body, with a subtle and an almost imperceptible motion, she leaned in, a little closer. And when he had finished his story, and he had turned to her to gauge her own reaction, he saw it. Her face was so close to his own that he could see his own reflection in her own, now wide and a shimmering, eyes. And he could feel her own warm and a gentle breath on his own neck. It was a closeness that was far beyond the bounds of a normal and a teacher-student relationship, a closeness that was now a new and an uncomfortable thing. His own words caught in his own throat. He leaned back a little, and a frown now came to his own face. Flam. What are you doing? Her own mind was now a whirlwind of a pure and a frantic thought. Don't panic. Don't let him see. And in a flash, a perfect and a flawless excuse was now formed. A look of a pure and a childlike contrition now came to her own face, and her own voice was now a small and a quiet sound. Teacher, I was just thinking about what we did. And how you and Teacher Serie had to save us. I feel so terrible. She looked down, and then up at him again, her own eyes now a wide and a shimmering pool of a pure and an unadulterated remorse. And I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. Have I made you uncomfortable? It was a plausible excuse. And her own, small and a wounded, expression, it was a thing that was a very difficult thing to disbelieve. It is not a thing that you need to be concerned with, he said, and his own voice was now a gentle and a soothing sound. You were just trying to save a life. And in the end, no great harm was done. He was just trying to be a normal and a rational person. But she now knew. He does not suspect. He does not even see how strange this is. A new and a different kind of a gratitude now welled up in her own heart, a gratitude for the very thing she had once so resented, his own long and an almost inhuman life. It had made him obtuse to the subtleties of a human emotion. Thank you, teacher, she said, and her own face was now a bright and a sunny thing. She leaned back a little, but her own, now slightly less intrusive, presence was still a far and a more intimate thing than a normal social distance. Then, have some of this, she said, and took a small and a sweet cake and placed it on his own plate. It's delicious. The look of an eager and a hopeful expectation in her own eyes, it was as if his own acceptance of the small and a simple gift was a sign of a true and a final forgiveness. He looked at her own, now pure and an innocent-looking, eyes, and the last of his own, now faint and a lingering, suspicion was now gone. All right, he said with a small and a helpless smile, I'll try some. Every 150 power stones equals one extra chapter. Chapter 235, Chapter 235, Serie is still asleep. Chapter 235, Serie is still asleep. He gave the dessert a fair, if somewhat clinical, review. But it was enough to make her heart soar. After their meal, she looked out at the sun and a new and a brilliant idea came to her. Teacher, she said, leaning in a little closer, the weather is so nice today. Shall we go for a walk? I hear the market here is very famous. She did not mention Serie, or the other two. This was to be a date for just the two of them. He looked out the window. The sun was shining. It was indeed a fine day. He had just dealt with the monster tide, and had refilled the city's barrier. He had nothing better to do. To take his dear apprentice for a walk, it would be a good way to bond. All right, he said with a nod. She could barely contain her joy. Hurry, she thought. Before the others wake up. Then let's go now, she said. And so, they left. She walked a little closer to him than usual, so close that their sleeves would occasionally brush against each other. And with every touch, her own heart would skip a beat. But it was not enough. The city, after the crisis, was now filled with a new and a vibrant energy. Teacher, look, she said, and pointed to a shop. They're selling quills made from the tail feathers of a northern snow eagle. The quality looks very good. And then, oh, the ore at this stall is of a low purity. Too many impurities. And then, what are those strange things in that shop? That spoon, is it stirring by itself? Is it a magical item? She was full of a new and a vibrant curiosity, a curiosity that was fueled by the presence of the one she so admired. She was no longer just his apprentice but a young girl, sharing her own, small and a simple, discoveries with the one she loved. He, for his part, was also enjoying himself. 1,000 years, and human magic had grown so diverse. The self-stirring spoon, it was a clever little trick, a simple and an elegant application of a magical drive. But nothing more. And the other items, their own magical structures were crude, but the ideas, they were good. Seeing that he was in a good mood, she grew a little bolder. At a stall selling scented sachets and essential oils, she stopped and picked up a red sachet. She took a deep sniff, and then held it out to him. "Teacher, doesn't this smell familiar?" He leaned in, a little surprised, and took a sniff himself. "Yes, a flower for calming the nerves." "That's right. It's the scent of the serenity flower. It's very good for when you're tired from your own research." She held it out to him, and her own fingers brushed against his own, a warm and a gentle touch. "All right, then. I won't be polite," he said with a nod, and took it from her. And with a new and a triumphant smile, she immediately paid for it, a quick and a decisive gesture, as if she was afraid he might change his mind. The child has grown up, he thought with a new and a strange feeling of a paternal pride. She's learned how to show her own appreciation. And then, at a stall selling a strange, ice blue drink, she bought two and handed one to him. "Try this, teacher." The stall keeper said it's made from a frost condensation grass. It's very unique. He took a sip. It was very cold, with a faint, sweet taste. It had been a long time since he had had anything so cold. "It's not bad," he said. "It just needs a little fizz." "Fizz?" she asked, a look of a pure and an unadulterated confusion on her own face. "Never mind," he said with a smile. It tasted a bit like a flat Pepsi. "It's good," he said again, and took another sip. And she, her own eyes now a bright and a shining thing, a thing that was a pure and an unadulterated hope, she waited for his own, and now most important, opinion. "It's good." And so they went on, and she, with a new and a terrible ingenuity, she created 1,000 small and a simple moments, 1,000 small and a simple interactions, 1,000 small and a simple looks of a pure and an unadulterated adoration, all of it hidden under the guise of a student's own, simple and a pure, concern for her own, dear teacher. He, for his part, he just thought she was being a little enthusiastic. A reaction to the battle, to her own near-death experience, a way to show her own gratitude. Human emotions, they were so much more demonstrative than those of an elf. They came to a quiet and a peaceful part of the city, a place of a flower shops, and the air was now filled with a new and a different kind of a sweet and a fragrant scent. Her own steps slowed, and her own eyes were now a wide and a wonder-filled thing. "Teacher, look. Moonlight bellflowers. They say they only bloom at night, and that their petals change color." She pointed to a cluster of a pale blue flowers, their petals now only half open. And then, to another. "And this one. The honeyword flower. Its fragrance, it is said that it can make people happy." "It seems to be working," he said with a smile, looking at her own, now bright and a happy, face. Every 150 power stones equals one extra chapter. Chapter 236, Chapter 236, The Magic to Make a Field of Flowers. Chapter 236, The Magic to Make a Field of Flowers. She lingered at the flower shop, looking at this one, and sniffing that one, a pure and a simple joy on her face. And he just smiled. In that moment, she was just an ordinary human girl who loved flowers. And her own, unadulterated love of them, it brought back a distant memory, a memory of another world, of another story. In that story, a certain red-haired girl had loved a certain spell, a spell that could create a field of flowers, a spell her own parents had taught her. So it had started so early, had it? He watched as she gently stroked a delicate red velvet rose. "You seem to really like flowers," he said. "Yes, I do," she said, her face still bright with a childlike wonder. "They're so beautiful, each one with its own unique shape and fragrance." She paused, and a new and a different kind of a seriousness came over her. "Actually, teacher, I have a dream. My parents once taught me a spell that can create a field of flowers. And I want to improve upon it, to create a new spell, a spell that can make any flower bloom, at any time, in any place. Not just any flower, but the ones I want to see, even the rarest of them. A sea of flowers that is all my own." As she spoke of her dream, she seemed to glow, a light that was born of a deep and a true love. He listened in silence. He could feel it, the sincerity behind her words. It was more than just a mage's pursuit of power. "A spell to make your own flowers bloom," he said with a smile. "An interesting idea. And a difficult one. It would require a great deal of imaginative power. With your own talent and understanding of magic, you might just be able to do it. And if not, I could always." He was about to say that he could help her, could even create the basic structure of the spell himself. It would not have been a difficult thing for him. But she shook her head, a new and a firm resolve in her own eyes. "No, teacher," she said, and her own voice was now a gentle, yet stubborn, thing. "Thank you for your kind offer. But I want to create this spell myself. I want to, with my own two hands, with my own heart, discover the secrets of a flower's bloom. The process itself, that is the greatest joy of magic, is it not? I do not want to miss a single step. He was taken aback, and then, a new and a different kind of a pride in his own student, now welled up in him. He nodded. You are right. And I will look forward to the day when I can see your own, unique, flower-blooming magic. At his words, she smiled even wider. And besides, she said, I'm already working on another spell. Oh. What is it? A spell to disguise, and even change, my own magical aura, she said, her own voice a low and a conspiratorial whisper. Just think, teacher, if I could change my own aura at will, it would be so useful in a battle with a demon, wouldn't it? They wouldn't be able to sense my own, true strength. And it could also be used to evade tracking spells. He now understood. To disguise one's own magical aura. It was a spell he himself had thought of 1,000 times before. But he had always held back. He had wanted her to create it herself. And now, she had. That is a fine idea, he said, and his own voice was now filled with a genuine and an unfeigned admiration. And a difficult one. But if you succeed, it will be a powerful weapon indeed. The demons are a cunning race. When they encounter an opponent they cannot defeat, they will flee. And so, you must be even more cunning than they are. And this is a fine idea. Her own face was now a deep and a brilliant shade of a red, and she felt as if she were floating. Really? I'll do my best, she said, and then, in a quiet and a secret part of her own heart, she added, and with this spell, I can get closer to you without you even noticing. They lingered at the flower shop for a little while longer, and she, in the end, bought a small and a beautiful bouquet of a honey-word flowers and a white chrysanthemums, and held it to her own chest. The sunlight fell on her own, now happy and a contented, face, a picture of a pure and an unadulterated bliss. And he watched her, and a new and a different kind of a peace now settled over his own, restless heart. Perhaps this is good, he thought. To be a normal person, and to watch his own apprentice shine with the light of her own, simple dream. But what he did not know was that beneath that beautiful and a peaceful surface, a new and a fervent love, a love that was as bright and as beautiful as the flowers in her own hands, was now blooming, and growing stronger with every passing day. She felt it, the distance between them, a distance that was now, slowly, but surely, beginning to close. And in that moment, in the bustling and a crowded street, it was as if they were in a world of their own, a world where there was no Serie, no Ella, no Frieren, just the two of them. And she wished that that moment could last forever. In Serie's room, she slowly opened her own eyes, a slight headache now a dull and a throbbing thing in her own head. She sat up and looked around. The room was a quiet and a silent thing. Rhodes, she called out, a force of a habit. And there was no answer. Oh, that's right, she thought. This is not my own hut. He is in the room next door. I should go and find him. Every 150 power stones equals 1 extra chapter.